For more on the issues facing Nigerian banks, I'm joined by Ian Greenstreet, chairman of Infinity Capital Partners. He's also an advisory member of the board of the London Stock Exchange and a non-executive director at Nigeria's Diamond Bank. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. According to this Arkham Capital report, Nigerian banks could be heading towards insolvency, a handful facing possible risk as a result of bad loans. What are the implications of that?
Well, first of all, these are my views and not necessarily the views of any of the boards that I sit on, including Diamond Bank. But just before we start, I think it's very important when we look at these reports is to look at the sort of vested interest behind these reports. Because clearly by having negative sentiment around the banks, you cause the value of those banks to go down, which enables other people to come in and buy those banks cheaply. So that's the first thing, and that's why it's important to have a look at the banks in a bit more detail. And three key things you need to look at. You need to look at the liquidity of the banks. You need to look at the capital of the banks. And that's really very critical. So let me just briefly deal with those issues. Some people talk about, the issue of Naira liquidity. Well, look, frankly, the central bank has got almost an unlimited capacity to come in and support banks in terms of Nairas. And therefore, there's nothing to fear on that side. Secondly, dollar liquidity. Now, look, we need to just discuss that a bit. In the past, what used to happen was the likes of the international oil companies would deposit their dollars in the likes of Deutsche Bank, in Germany, the American banks. And those banks would on-lend that money to Western industry. What subsequently happened was that Nigerian banks had those dollars, and they took those dollars and then on-lent those dollars to the Nigerian oil and gas industry to develop local industry. Right. And that's quite important to appreciate.
Those loans are failing now, aren't they? The people are not paying them back. Lots of people, lots of the companies are failing. And you mentioned the central bank there. We switch attention to it, but I understand there are reserves that are a 10-year low. So, that creates a big problem, doesn't it?
Look, it's from a dollar perspective, what's really caused a bit of pressure on the banks is that the deposits that were taken by the banks from NNPC were on-lent into the Nigerian oil and gas industry.
But you don't dispute the fact that they are under pressure.
Well, let me respond to that. So effectively, all the central bank would have to do, if they wanted and felt necessary, would be able to say to the banks, actually, you don't need to repay the dollar deposits to the NNPC. Take your time. Or they could say, well, you can repay them in Naira. That would ease substantially the liquidity issues, because that's where they've emanated from.
Right, and you don't get any sense that the central bank is planning to do that?
Well, I think the central bank will decide what it feels required. They closely monitor all the banks, and that's a matter for them. I'm just saying that there's nothing to panic about because they have that in their armory to do if required.
Well, talking about panic, the report also looks at credit growth, and according to the authors, if you adjust for inflation, there's actually a credit crunch of almost 20% year over year. So basically, the banks are running out of money because many of the people who owe them money are bankrupt, and the banks simply don't have the liquidity to cover the debts. I understand what you're saying about what needs to be done, but we need to establish that that is the position of the banks.
I think we need to go into this not superficially, but a bit more detail. But let me just drop one thing your way. A bank at the moment in Nigeria, when it takes deposits, let's say 100 Naira of deposits, has to put aside 22.5 Naira and not invest that, not lend that. It's at zero interest. And there's 19 trillion deposits in the Nigerian banking industry. So if the central bank, for example, decided that it wanted those deposits to be redeployed, that would create $500 billion of additional profit to the banks. So that can easily be corrected. And let me just come back to one other point. Capital. The international minimum is 8%, and if you add a capital conservation buffer, 10.3%. Nigerian banks on average are at 14.9%. So well above that,
So your advice is don't panic?
My advice is most certainly don't panic.
Of course, I know that things that go on in African banks are not always totally transparent to a Western eye. Can we be sure that these numbers and stress tests by Arkham Capital are accurate and robust?
Well, I haven't seen the Arkham report in any detail, but as I say, I think that it's not just looking at the numbers and the stress testing, it's understanding the way the actual industry ticks and what can be done and what cannot be done to deal with any issue. And I think that's important. But I think what this all brings to mind is it's important that banks know what their business model is and have very good risk management. And I'll drop one last point. Don't forget, what caused a lot of this was the oil price. The oil price has gone up from a low of $26 per barrel, and just yesterday was at $51.9 per barrel. And you know what that happens when that occurs? A recovery starts to occur.
Okay, Ian Greenstreet, member of the board of the London Stock Exchange, a non-executive director at Nigeria's Diamond Bank, and of course, chairman of Infinity Capital Partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you.